Few years ago, building a fully playable 3D character like this would have taken a full production pipeline. Concept art, modeling, retopology, rigging, animation setup, and probably a handful of paid tools along the way. But in 2026, the barrier to entry looks very different. In this video, I'm going to take a character idea, just a structured prompt, and walk it all the way through image generation, 3D conversion, rigging, and into Unity, using only free tools. No paid subscriptions, no shortcuts. Just a clean pipeline from a prompt to a playable character you can drop into your own project. Let's get started. We're starting here in Google Gemini, which gives you some free image generations each day using their Nano Banana Pro model. All you need is a Google account. We're going to generate some concept art for a stylized dark fantasy night. I'm including specific wording here like T-pose, symmetrical, white background, and uniform lighting. Those constraints might look simple, but they're intentional. They make the image much easier to convert into a clean 3D model later in the pipeline. So here you can see I went back and forth with the prompts a few times until I landed on the stylized fallen night look that I wanted. Sometimes these tools give you something great right away, but most of the time it takes a bit of iteration, adjusting details, pushing the style, refining the silhouette until it really clicks. And this was the final result that we're going to use to start our image to 3D generation. We'll head over to Tencent's Hunyuan 3D web app, and I'll put a link in the description, but over here you can create a free account and get up to 20 model generations per day. Now the interface is in Chinese, but most browsers have a built-in translator, so just right-click and translate the page and you should be good to go. Now you might be tempted to use their latest 3.1 model, but for game assets that's not what we want. It doesn't offer a smart or low poly option, so the polygon count ends up way too high for real-time use. Instead, we're going to click into the 3D application suite and choose the laboratory option. That gives us access to their 3D intelligent topology, which produces a much more reasonable mesh for use inside a game engine. And here we're just going to upload a single image, but you can upload multiple images from different angles if you want better accuracy for the sides and back of your character. We're also going to switch the mesh type to quadrilateral, and this is important because quads deform much better around joints like elbows and knees, which makes rigging and animation significantly smoother. Once everything's set, just click generate and give it a few minutes to process. And here's our completed character, coming in at around 6,500 faces, which is perfectly reasonable for most modern games. In this viewer, you can toggle between the wireframe and the material view, but it is a lot easier to evaluate the mesh properly inside of Blender, so let's go ahead and download this as an FBX file and bring it into Blender to take a closer look. Now, inside Blender, we'll start in Material Preview mode. You can see the textures came through pretty nicely. For this demo, I'm not going to do any mesh or texture cleanup, but if you're comfortable in Blender, this is where you could refine the texture in the image editor or clean up any small topology issues. Switching over to the wireframe, you can see the quad flow around the arms and elbows is actually pretty clean. That loop structure is exactly what we want. It'll help the character deform much more naturally once we rig and animate it. Before we close Blender, there's one important step. We need to export the texture as a PNG file. To do that, go into Texture Paint mode, then in the top left menu choose Image, Save As. We'll need that texture when we import everything into Unity. Next, we're going to rig the character using AccuRig. This is a free desktop application that automatically generates a skeletal rig, which is what allows other software like Blender or Unity to animate the character. All you need to do here is open the FBX file that we exported earlier, then place the guide markers where the tool indicates. Head, shoulders, elbows, hips, knees, and so on. Just follow the reference diagram in the top right corner, and as long as those markers are positioned accurately, the auto-rigging process works really well. Once everything is placed correctly, just go ahead and click Calibrate, and within a minute or two you'll see your character come to life in a test pose. AccuRig includes several different preview animations that you can use to check the deformation. So pay close attention to the shoulders and elbows and knees. If anything looks off, you can just go back and adjust the markers until the movement looks clean and natural. When you're happy with it, click Add Motions, but don't select any animations here, we only need the base rig. Then click Export FBX and choose Unity as the target application. Now we're going to create a new URP project in Unity. I'm using Unity 6.3 here, which is the current LTS version. Go ahead and name the project Fallen Night and then click Create Project. Now it may take a minute or two for this to initialize for the first time. Once it loads, you should see the default Unity interface. From here, I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder in the project window called Player, And this is where we'll keep all of our character related assets. I like to keep character assets isolated like this. It just kind of makes iteration and cleanup much easier later. And then once we have that in place, we'll go ahead and drag that rigged FBX file that we just exported from AccuRig along with the texture PNG we saved from Blender. These next settings are important. So first select the FBX file and look at it in the inspector. In the model tab, we're going to want to scroll down to normals, and by default this is set to import, but we want to change it to calculate. If you leave it on import, you can run into shading issues, especially under different lighting conditions, and the character may look oddly lit or faceted. Next, we're going to go ahead and switch over to the rig tab, and for animation type, we want to choose humanoid here. This allows Unity to retarget the standard humanoid animations, and we'll be using a free animation pack in just a moment, which takes advantage of this. Alright, so next let's go ahead and add a 3D object. We're going to choose terrain here, and this is just going to give a surface for our character to walk on. We're just doing this temporarily. A little later I will take us into the free 3D stylized forest asset that we're going to put him in. But for now, you can go ahead and just drag the character into the scene and take a look at him. And as you can see here, he does not have any textures yet. So one thing I like to do here is just for scale, pull a cube into the scene here. So this is a 1 by 1 by 1 cube, and if we're thinking about the character in terms of size, let's say 2 meters about, that's a little over 6 feet tall. So we want him to be the scale to look right, and this will just kind of give you a sense of, okay, how tall would he be in comparison to other items in the scene. So once that looks good, the next thing we're going to go ahead and do here is actually work on the material. So I've opened up the FBX file inside of the project tray there, and I just hit Control D. What that does is it makes a duplicate of the material there. We need to have this actually outside of the FBX file, and then you can see there at the base map, I just went ahead and dragged that PNG file onto it. And I always like to uncheck specular highlights and environment reflection. And if your smoothness is turned up at all, you want to make sure that's down at 0 as well, especially for stylized looking characters. Otherwise they could look kind of shiny. And then over here on the night import settings in materials, you just go ahead and drop that material we just created and click apply. And just like that, there you go. You have a textured character inside your Unity scene. I like to name my materials with the M underscore prefix, but you can name them whatever you want. So let's take a little closer look at our guy here, and he's looking pretty good inside the scene. Next, we're going to install a free asset from the Unity Asset Store called Super Character Controller. This gives us full mouse and keyboard movement, things like walking and running and jumping, all driven by our rigged humanoid character. I'll link it in the description. Once it's added to your Unity account, you can open up the package manager and then switch to My Assets and import it into your project. Now, when you import it, you might get this warning message. You can just click Yes here and let it do the update. Now, down in the project window, you'll see several prefab characters included with the package. We're going to use one of these as a base, then swap out the sample mesh for our custom knight. Drag the character.01 prefab into the scene, and I'm going to go ahead and press play quickly just to confirm everything's working as expected. Now don't worry about the pink material on the sample character, that's just a shader mismatch, and we're going to replace this model anyway. And so as you can see, movement works out of the box. We can run around the terrain and everything is functioning properly. Now in the hierarchy, you'll see that the character.001 object has a child called character, and that's the sample model. We're going to delete that child object and replace it with our custom knight mesh. Alright, so now we're going to set up our animator controller. An animator controller is basically the state machine. It defines how character transitions between things like walking and running and jumping and other movement states. But instead of modifying the original asset that came with the character controller pack, we're going to go ahead and duplicate the character animator controller that came inside of the package. I'm renaming it to Knight Animator here, and then I'm just going to copy it over into our player folder so everything stays organized. Then what you want to do is select the Knight object in the scene, and find the animator component in the inspector, and assign the Knight animator controller to the controller field. Now let's go ahead and open the Night Animator controller and take a look at the state machine. So you'll see three main states here: idle, moving, and moving fast. Now out of the box, these are going to be using generic placeholder animations, but we're going to want to replace those with proper humanoid animations. So for that, we'll install another free asset pack. This is Kevin Iglesias' Human Basic Motions Free. Go head back into the package manager and find it under My Assets and import it just like we did with the Super Character Controller. Once those animations are imported, we're going to go ahead and return to the Animator window, and then what you can do is just select each state, idle, moving, and moving fast, and replace the motion field with the corresponding animation from the new pack. Now one thing that I like to do is, if you want to preview how the transitions look, just basically click on one of those transition lines between the two states, and then drag your night character into the preview window in the bottom right, and then you can scrub and test the blend between the animations. Now, one last thing we're going to need to do here in order for this to work right is in the Super Character Controller component. This is on the character.001 object here. We're going to need to set the third-person animator inside of the animator setup here. So you're going to want to drag your night controller right into that third-person animator, and that will wire it up to tell it which animator controller to actually use to control the character. I'm going to uncheck apply root motion here as it's not necessary, and from there you can see our night character is able to move around the scene just like we had the demo character a minute ago. Now our animated and rigged character is ready to go. So before we work on the stylized forest scene, I'm going to go ahead and rename our night character to Fallen Night here, and then go ahead and drag him into the player folder. And what this will do is create a prefab, which is a very convenient way to save off objects inside of Unity so that you can reuse them inside of other scenes. So I've dragged him in there, and you can see there's a Fallen Night.prefab file there now. And the next thing we're going to do is head back over to our package manager again, and this is another free asset pack that I found on the Unity Asset Store that looks really nice, called Fantasy Worlds Free Stylized Open World Environment here. And so we're going to go ahead and import it. You can kind of take a look and see what it looks like. So we're going to import this out of the box, and then once we get it in place, I'm going to kind of walk you through how I adjusted the lighting in the scene to make it look more like a nighttime setting that is a little bit more appropriate for our Fallen Night character here. So let me go ahead and import this asset pack, and then inside of this one, this is pretty common with asset packs. There's a scene that you have to kind of load up for URP here. And so now we're inside the demo scene, and this is what we're going to use to place our night character. So I found a nice little spot for him to drop into. This is just going to be kind of his starting point in the scene. And a lot of times these asset packs will have a bunch of extra information like readmes and such. I'm going to go ahead and delete those. Get rid of the main camera as well, because our character controller has its own camera. And then I'm going to go ahead and drag that prefab right into the scene, and hopefully it will work. So sometimes the scaling is a little off. You can see he's a little small, so you might need to adjust that. But let's see if it works. So when I dragged the night prefab into this new scene, the player input was just not responding and movement didn't work. And I spent quite a while trying to debug it, checking input settings, verifying the animator, reviewing the controller setup, but sometimes in Unity, especially when working with multiple packages, things just don't behave the way you expect. And this is a good reminder: in game development, you're going to hit roadblocks. Sometimes the fastest way forward isn't to keep digging, but just to pivot. In this case, I just ended up rebuilding the character setup from scratch inside the demo scene, where everything was already working, and that approach was predictable and stable. Not every problem needs to be solved immediately. Sometimes you can just move forward with what works. Now we're going to move into some of the final touches. So right now this scene feels kind of bright and cheery, but that doesn't really match the mood of our Fallen Night. I want this to feel more like a moonlit night. So first I'm going to go ahead and select the directional light in the scene, and in the inspector, switch the light settings to use color temperature and adjust it toward a cooler bluish tone, something that feels more like moonlight rather than sunlight. And then next, I'm going to go ahead and open up the lighting settings panel, and for the environment lighting, change the source to color and pick a subtle cool blue tone. So this really shifts the ambient light in the scene and helps reinforce that nighttime atmosphere. Okay, and now that our lighting feels a little bit more like moonlight, we're going to go ahead and swap out the skybox to really sell the atmosphere. So for this, I'm going to pop back over into web browser and I'm going to use a free tool called OmniCraft. This is on the Rodin website. And what this tool basically allows you to do is generate panoramic skyboxes from a simple text prompt. Now, I already generated a starry night sky that fits the mood of the scene, so I'm going to go ahead and download that version and bring it into Unity. Now, I'm going to drag the Skybox file into the project window. OmniCraft gives you a few export options. The standard EXR works, but I actually recommend using the HDR high version for better resolution and overall clarity in the final scene. And so once that is imported, go ahead and right-click in the project window and create a new material. Rename it to something like Starry Night Sky, and then in the inspector, change the shader to Skybox Panoramic. Then you can go ahead and drag the HDR file into the spherical HDR slot. And then finally, open up the lighting settings and go to the Environment tab, and then assign the new material to the Skybox material field, and you should immediately see your sky change to the new starry sky that we just created. Now, you'll notice that the sky looks a little bit too bright by default, and that's just because the exposure setting in the Skybox material. So in the inspector, you can just lower the exposure value a little bit until it feels more natural for a night scene. Now let's press play and see how everything comes together. So it's looking pretty good, but something still feels a little washed out. And the reason for this is that the camera that comes with the character controller doesn't have post-processing enabled by default. So we're going to go back into the scene and select the camera, and then go to the rendering section in the inspector and enable post-processing. Once that's in place, we'll press play again, and immediately you can see the difference here. The colors are deeper, the contrast is stronger, and the overall lighting feels much richer and more cinematic. And that's going to wrap things up. We went from a simple prompt in Gemini to a fully playable animated character inside a stylized moonlit forest using entirely free tools. If you found this helpful and you're interested in more practical AI to Unity workflows like this, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.